Welcome to Zero to Start, a podcast about immersive development that brings you inspiring conversations with immersive creators, developers, and industry leaders. I'm your host, Ceciliana Trevino. GameDriver enables video game developers, testers, and producers to automate playtesting, improving time to market, test coverage, and overall quality and revenue. The company brings over 30 years of test automation expertise to the massive gaming industry, as well as enterprise, where next-gen user experiences are built using gaming technologies, including augmented and virtual reality, to deliver consistent, repeatable testing to the app development process. Here to tell us more about GameDriver's powerful results and how you can increase productivity is Shane Evans, co-founder at GameDriver. Shane is a pioneering product management leader who has led mature, market-leading products and introduced new products and solutions to fit changing market and business needs for HP, HSBC, and more. His ability to fuse a passion for games with cutting-edge innovation and enterprise solutions gives him a unique and invaluable perspective on the industry. You can find Shane at GDC, AWE, and many other global conferences. Visit GameDriver.io to get your free trial of GameDriver and download their exclusive resource to discover the strengths and gaps in your testing process. Be sure to check out our show notes, packed with all the links you need for further exploration and learning. Let's get started. Welcome to the podcast, Shane. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Tell us about GameDriver's origin story and what is your company's why?
Sure. I started my career as a tester, but not in this space, not in gaming or XR, but in enterprise software. I was actually a quality assurance tester at HSBC for several years before moving over to Hewlett-Packard as a solutions architect, which meant I gave demos to other companies who were thinking about purchasing their own test automation software. I later moved into product management and spent several years there where I led two of the largest software testing products in enterprise history. So I was pretty fortunate to have that experience. But I've been a gamer my whole life. And I always thought, how can I translate my experience to something that I'm really passionate about, which is the gaming and XR space. I'll tie those two together in a minute, but how I met one of my co-founders, Robert Gutierrez, our CEO, was playing World of Warcraft. We actually met in game before we met in real life, and later became colleagues where we worked together at HP. And I was in product management, he was in product marketing, and we launched some fantastic products in that space to help people test web and mobile applications. And so fast forward to 2016, where I was doing some online training on how to develop video games or use game engines, I should say. And that's how gaming and XR really tie together, is through the game engines, Unity, Unreal Engine, etc. Those are primarily where XR experiences are built. And when it came time to test my creation as part of this program, I found that there was no tools available. And so I was asking the professor at the time, how does this scale in the real world? How do people go about testing their creations so that they work on different platforms and in different form factors, etc. And he said they just test it. They just play the game or play the experience in some way. And I was not satisfied with that answer. And at that moment, I realized that I needed to do something. And so I started talking to people and going to conferences on my own budget and just exploring, why hasn't this been done? Why hasn't anybody looked at test automation in this space? I'd come from an industry where you couldn't develop an application without considering testing and automation. There was no, 100-man teams testing mobile applications or CRM or some big business app. So it just didn't make sense. But surely there must be some technical reason or some other barrier that prevented this from happening. And when I found that there wasn't, I got to work with Philip, our other co-founder, Philip Mayhew, who's our technical lead and the brains behind the technology. And about a year later, we launched the company.
That's exciting. I mean, how rare is it that a problem presents itself and no one really is answering the call? How did that make you feel?
It gave me a great sense of purpose. And I know that's really dramatic sounding, but I've been somewhat chasing that purpose since 2016 now. There have been sort of isolated attempts to provide a solution, something specific to a platform like, a MetaQuest or a Nintendo Switch, or maybe there's been a tool that was developed just for Unity, but nothing that really satisfied the need across the industry, across platforms, across engines. And that was a problem that I felt or still feel very strongly needs to be solved, but not just for the success of our company or even the game makers themselves. But if you think about the people who are doing the work, who are out there testing these applications, and in gaming in particular, there are armies of testers who work primarily manually, like they just play the game with their two hands, and they'll do that until they burn out and either become managers for other people to do the work, or they exit, they find some other path in the industry. And to me, that's just not sustainable.
So this really helps bridge that gap between that ability to scale, as you mentioned. And so it must save so much time and money.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. We get a lot of doubting from people, particularly in gaming, less so in XR and much less so in enterprise XR, where companies in aerospace and defense and medical services and training and simulation, they get it. They get it usually pretty quickly. The need, the technical capabilities, and why we're not trying to get rid of people in this equation. We're trying to empower them. And if you have to do something more than like 4 times in your job, it should be automated, especially in a technical field, right? And computer software is really good at being automated, but there's always this pushback that, our application or our game is too complex, it's too unique, and you could never automate this. And then shortly after they try, sometimes with a little help from us and sometimes with help from one of our partners, but generally our customers get it on their own. They're amazed by the results. That why didn't they start this sooner? And
the light bulb goes off.
it does. Like, we're talking sometimes unbelievable results, almost to where we've had to pad the results in a way that makes them more believable. And I'll give you an example. There was a company out of Singapore called Mythic Protocol who's doing a mobile co-op game built in Unity. And the game is fast-paced and it's dynamic. It changes every time, and you've got multiplayer scenarios. And what this team was doing at the end of every 2 weeks development cycle, which is called a sprint, is the entire team would just play the game for 2 days. Everybody from the management down. And they called it hypercare, I believe, where just to make sure everything's working before they go on to the next development cycle. And within, I believe, a month, they were able to eliminate that 2 days of all hands-on testing and just automate it. So giving back 2 days to the entire team after just a month. But when we put it in our slides, we say, okay, within 90 days, because when we say 30 days, people don't believe it.
Your previous experience teed you up quite well for this. Was there anything that surprised you?
Not really. It was more the technical challenges of getting things to a place that we could deliver on the promise. And that's by no means trivial. A lot of our time is spent chasing after versions or platforms. Like in my office right now, as I'm looking around, I've got a Pico 4E headset. I've got a Quest 2. I've got a Vision Pro, a Nintendo Switch, an Xbox. And just making sure that all of these things work can sometimes be very challenging. And for our customers, it's not that they can just press a button and all of their problems go away. That was never the promise. It was more, you're going to be putting in this effort anyways. Why not do it in a way that is repeatable, that you can capture and codify and reuse, rather than put in that effort once and then it's gone. You've spent that effort and you'll never get it back. So it's really just about focusing your resources in a more intelligent way for our customers and for us. Like, we can't support everything, but we try to go after what are the most important things for our customers. we get questions all the time about, oh, can you support this engine or that engine? And the answer is yes, but it depends on where the demand lies.
You're improving efficiencies. And, if you're thinking about making a game, sometimes you're more into the creative aspects. You're not thinking about how much effort you're saving by putting these practices in place early.
Right. Yeah. And that is another obstacle that we get from game producers in particular, where they're so focused on, let's just get it done and get it out the door. We don't have time to sort of stop and invest and plan for a strategy around something like testing and test automation. For the larger, more mature studios, it's less of a question. They're more advanced in their practices, and they do think about things like team efficiencies and where they focusing their efforts. If they have to support multiple platforms, as a lot of game makers do today, then they tend to prioritize things. And we're coming in and saying, well, you don't have to do that. You can build your tests once and run them everywhere that you're supporting. And that's usually a pretty obvious win for them. But a lot of times in the smaller companies, it's just, we just need to get it done. And that's challenging. But we're starting to see shifts in this industry in all of gaming and XR. Whereas a few years ago, nobody was talking about this, it seemed. And when we went to conferences, there was maybe, one or two talks at GDC. There's been a nice roundtable there for several years from a man named Andrew Frey out of the UK, who works for Roll7 Games. And that was it. But if we were talking to attendees about what we were offering, they would go, oh, really? Like, I never thought of that. And surely that isn't going to work for my game, as we still sometimes hear. But this last year, it seemed like everyone was talking about it. There was representatives from several workers' unions, a lot of representation from QA. If you've watched any of the news in this space, in gaming in particular, that whole discussion around crunch is really centered around QA and testing, because they're the ones that have to kind of put in the extra hours, the extra days at the end of the release cycle in order to get things across the line. And that's really what we're intending to change by empowering those individuals to do more with that time.
It's really exciting, and it's interesting how the behavioral psychology comes into play, right? Because you would think that a producer would be your biggest ally and advocate. What sort of strategies do you need to get producers to see that this is something that they need to start implementing in order to leverage their own influence?
Yeah, this has been a large part of our strategy as a company. We recognize that there's a sort of permafrost, as our CEO likes to call it, where the status quo is our biggest challenge, our biggest competitor, is just doing things the way we've always done them. And when you're talking about a 35 or more year stagnancy in that space, it's really hard to change. So our focus has been on education of the market and just slowly chipping away at either individuals, but influential people in this space, in the studios. It is actually a smaller industry than people realize. It's large in the sense of like overall revenue. And we talk about gaming as this juggernaut, $190 billion industry, which is bigger than all professional sports in terms of revenue. But the number of people in it is still relatively small. And so word spreads pretty quickly. Sometimes it's very challenging. And working with publishers, for example, we've talked to some major publishers whose the studios that they work with are the ones that are less willing to take on something new. And even if they're getting direction from the publisher saying, you should consider this because you're supporting 10 platforms and you've got this, short release window, you should consider automated testing. It's sometimes the studios themselves that are saying no. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge. Thankfully for us, there's another side of the company strategy and also the industry, which is the XR space that leverages a lot of the same tools, as I said, the engines. And there's a lot of cross-pollination between the two. So often you'll talk to XR developers who have done work in gaming, or they're doing work in gaming on the side or something like that. And they're very involved in that space. So in XR, where we get less friction and more understanding of the value of testing and test automation, that's where we're seeing a lot of uptake. And those people go on to tell others in the gaming industry that, hey, there's the better way to do this.
Can you talk a little bit about the unique challenges of quality assurance for XR experiences? How is it different than a 2D flat game?
Yeah. From a technical perspective, not a lot, meaning, a game engine sees them as the same thing. In fact, Unity and Unreal, there's no such thing as true 2D, even though what you see on the screen might go back and forth and up and down and present in a 2D manner. The engine itself sees everything as 3D. Well, only one that I'm aware of, and there's probably several others, but I've only worked with Unity, Unreal, and Godot. And Godot does actually have a true 2D rendering. So anyways, on the larger of the engines, Unity and Unreal, the camera, which is moving around the scene and a 2D environment or experience, you're moving that camera left and right and up and down. In a 3D game, like a first-person shooter or something, you're moving the camera in 6 degrees of freedom, right? Or I should say, 3 degrees. It's when you put on the headset that you actually become the camera. And that's where you get the 6 degrees of freedom where you can move in any direction, but you become that camera. So from our perspective, it's very similar. And ours is a pretty generic toolkit that can be applied to all these different environments. The unique challenge that XR presented was, how do I test an XR experience without putting the headset on? And so you have controllers or you have hand gestures or something like that. So we had to develop a way to basically trick the engine into thinking that there were controllers connected and providing input when there weren't any. They're simulated in the sense that the engine still behaves as if they are there and connected and providing input like a user would, but they're not physically.
So it's virtual reality.
Sort of, yeah, which is a great game, by the way, if you've never played it. Very, very in-depth. But yeah, essentially that. One individual at aerospace and defense company, I can't mention, but they are a customer of ours, came to us at GDC. And they're not a game developer, of course, but they were there to see what was new in the industry. And this was not this last GDC, but the one in 2022, I believe. And he told us that he was spending upwards of 5 hours a week just putting on the headset and taking it off and putting it on and taking it off. Because every time he developed something, in this project of theirs, which I can't name, to test it, you had to put the headset on. And he said, if you can help with that, that would be a huge win for us, because every one of the developers needs to do that. And so we got to work on a solution which is now, a core part of our XR testing capability, which is that simulated input where we can tell the engine that there's a headset and controllers plugged in if there isn't, or we can run it on the headset. Like you can run your tests on the headset itself. I wouldn't recommend that while you're wearing it, but it'll make you sick very quickly. But that was kind of a key moment for us as well, just understanding the problems of the XR developer.
Those points of friction that over time they really add up. And it's so great to know that GameDriver is able to respond to those kinds of concerns that can really create a drag, right?
I think he called it the mean time to vomit, the MTTV, which particularly in a new experience that you're developing when things aren't put together completely, but also a lot of like really jarring animation, stuff like that. And until you get things ironed out, then that becomes a real problem. So we aimed at reducing that.
As we start to see all of this activity with Apple releasing their headset, what was your reaction to that?
Yeah, we knew the Vision Pro announcement would be a big one. I don't think the industry is quite caught up with that one yet. I think there's still great potential there, and there's plenty of perfectly valid criticisms on lack of multiplayer or multi-user experiences and things like that. But I have no doubt that device will gain traction, if not just in the enterprise. I think you'll start to see more and more of them. But the big piece that I found interesting in the announcement leading up to the Vision Pro release was their mention of Unity in that announcement. And Apple's never done that before, where they highlight a specific platform for creation of content on their own. It's usually they would highlight experiences or apps that were available from prominent developers, but never a partner like that. And for most people looking to develop on the Vision Pro, it's going to be in Unity or Unreal. And so these are game engines, right? So if you're even an enterprise software company looking to develop an app for this platform, you're going to have to learn how to do game development at some point. So yeah, that's a big shift. In the enterprise space, in my career, we've seen a few of these where there was web and web 2.0, and then the big shift to mobile, where mobile was first being developed by a small team, usually with a limited budget and resources. And within a few years went from that to mobile first and then mobile only for a lot of companies. And we're seeing the same sort of shift happen towards XR.
Tell us about some of the new features in your release from March.
Yeah, our latest release was in March, and we try to release quarterly. Sometimes that shifts a little bit in either direction, but the original intent was in December to have just a very light release, not to overload ourselves with new features and stuff like that. That ended up not happening because we were talking to our customers and some of our prospects about things that they were working on, and we quickly found that there was the need for some pretty big things. One of which was the Unity dots support, or ECS, Entity Component System. And like their input system in the past and a few other features in Unity, that's been around for a few years, but hasn't seen wide adoption. But we're just starting to see development studios in XR and in gaming leverage the ECS in a way that's meaningful, and that requires us to be able to support it.
Can you tell us a little bit more about dots?
Yeah, it's centered around the entity component system. So if you think about a very large environment in some of these games and experiences that might have millions of little unique entities that are each doing their own thing. A good example might be like a Sim City, where all of the cars and the people and trains and all of these things are happening all the time. It becomes very challenging to manage them all. And so ECS is a way of doing that without having to create and manage individual objects, which can become quite difficult, a lot of overhead. And so it's about scale, right? ECS really allows for larger immersive worlds. And Unreal has a similar system called MASS. I'm not sure what MASS stands for, MASS. So we sought to support both of these things, and we have. But it was just another one of those moments where, we were looking to do minor bug fixes and updates to platform support and this and that. But somebody came along and said, hey, I'd really like to be able to do this. And here's a problem that we were having in automation. And so we focused on supporting that. There is other features there like blueprints for Unreal, which is important for us because Unreal is another one of those sort of platforms where people are just sort of satisfied in doing what they're doing and haven't given a lot of consideration to things like automated testing outside of unit testing, of course. And so Blueprints represents that kind of bridge for us, that we're able to support their like unit test framework and their preferred method of creating tests, which is in Blueprints, and extend on that and provide features that Unreal doesn't have. And so sort of bridging the gap between what developers are doing today and what they could be doing using something like GameDriver. So just a lot of sort of high value features that went into that release, as we tend to balance between supporting new platforms and new features in every release and things like bug fixes, of course. But this one kind of ran away with us. Like I said, it was supposed to be just a minor release in December, and it ended up being a major one in March.
How can developers and producers start using GameDriver?
It's a licensed software for test execution. So if you think about a small team might have 5 testers with some machines in the closet or in the cloud that are actually used for executing tests across different devices, platforms. Each of those testers might have a license, and those machines that are in the cloud have licenses to execute the tests. And therefore, you might have 10 to support the lot of them. And those are renewed annually. So we have a few different tiers, recognizing not every studio is the same. So developers of just PC and mobile, for example, that's kind of the base tier. And then if you're doing work in consoles or XR, that's another tier. And it requires quite a bit more development and support from our side as well. So I think that's probably justified. And we find that companies who are doing work in either consoles or XR, there's a bit more involved than in just sort of the PC and mobile development space. So we try and keep it simple, but the software is given to the customer. They run it on their own environment. There's no like SaaS platform at this time. It's more of an annual term license.
What developer resources do you have available for your customers?
Oh yeah, lots. We provide a free online training on a site called Test Guild at testguild.com. If you go under courses, there's a picture of me where in this office, provide about 2 hours worth of how-to just to get people started. And that's totally free. Our support site linked from our website is available for anybody to look at, as is our GitHub, which has all of the sort of usage of GameDriver itself. And so there's a lot of resources there for individuals or teams looking to get started. We are attending several events each year, and where we're going to be focusing on things like the Vision Pro and what's new in XR technologies that can benefit from test automation. And then there is the Game Quality Forum in Amsterdam in late June, right after AWE. And the Game Quality Forum is important for us because, like I said, a few years ago, nobody was talking about test automation in this space. And it seems that the more events that we attend, the more people are thinking about, hey, there needs to be a better way to do this so we don't all burn out collectively. Something more sustainable for the industry that supports the career paths of testers. Coming up as a tester myself, I recognize that this is something that the industry is in desperate need of. And we're talking about standardization, and not just around GameDriver, but just the practice of test automation as a practice, as a unique discipline that should have its own career path, its own education, certification programs, and should be recognized as a valuable member of the team, separate from maybe manual tester or from developer. When today I think you're one or the other. You're a tester or you're a developer. But there's someone in the middle in enterprise software that I think really needs to exist in what we're calling immersive experiences, gaming in XR, which is that automated tester.
It sounds like a really good opportunity to have an impact and lead the change.
Yeah, it's something that I believe very strongly in. We extended the invitation to not just the studios in gaming and XR, but to our competitors as well to participate in that discussion, because I don't believe any one person or company can have that type of influence. And I think for us to really sort of improve as an industry, we need to come together. I think that there's the idea that a rising tide lifts all ships, and we hope to help with that in some way.
For someone with your depth of experience in enterprise and how difficult it is to get the status quo to change, how much are you thinking about the direction of the future technology versus your heads down, we're just trying to get the latest release out? Where's that balance?
It's a good question, and one that I wrestle with daily. But my experience as a product manager for a large enterprise software company gave me some insight as to how to look at trends and changes. Take AI, for example, and what's happening with large language models and how they're being applied everywhere. What does it mean for this space? And while we can certainly predict that LLMs can and will be used for content creation, for dialogue, for characters, for all that sort of content stuff, that's a separate discussion, of course, because there's a lot of controversy over, what's appropriate there. But when asked if that will be applied to testing and test automation, we know the answer, because those large language models depend on just mountains of data to pull from, to understand how things have been done or what they have looked like before, so that they can predict what is the next word in the sentence, basically. But in this space, there is no model supporting testing in gaming and XR. There's no data to support that. And so we need to be a part of creating that, not just as GameDriver, but as an industry. And if we're going to reap the benefits of this technology, then we need to get to work on how to get us there. there's a saying in product management, and as in hockey, which is Wayne Gretzky's famous, skate to where the puck is going, not to where it was. And that's what we've been doing, and what we've been trying to do, at least since our inception, was to skate where the puck is going. We already know from decades of enterprise experience where software testing needs to go and what has worked and what hasn't worked. So instead of going through all of that pain again in a new market, we're just sort of lining ourselves up to where we know at a certain time, at a certain level of adoption, that people are going to need a different capability than perhaps what we're providing today. And so we're benefiting from, decades of experience in sort of tangential industries, but also having to look at, what are some of the disruptions in this space, like AI, for example, that we need to get ahead of.
Taking a look back, what was your first aha moment with immersive tech in XR, and why and how did you make the switch from enterprise into gaming? I think you've kind of mentioned that before. You were a lifelong gamer, so.
Yeah, I realized pretty early on that this was going to be a huge, not just a huge problem that needed a solution, but that gaming and game technologies, which were already at the time in 2016, starting to be used more for non-gaming products, right? And so, again, looking at sort of the adoption at the time where people were starting to develop non-gaming applications. And that's where killer apps come from, is not just in gaming, which is something that a lot of people do. Billions of people are gamers. But when something appeals to everybody, when everybody can have a day-to-day use of a product, that's when things really change. And it started to look like that was happening in XR. And certainly in the last few years, we've seen just a flurry of activity and companies getting involved, and more startups in this space than even in gaming in the past 10 years, trying to apply XR to every sort of problem, from training and simulation to meditation and PTSD therapies and so many other applications, that it's almost just a matter of time before that killer app comes along and nobody can live without it. That's when I realized that what I was doing at the time was interesting, but not where I needed to be. And I actually pitched GameDriver to my company at the time. I pitched it to HP and said, "This is what I see happening in the industry and where I think testing needs to go." And they said, "Thank you, but that's not our core market, and we're going to pass." And I said, "Okay, that's my cue. It's been nice," and I resigned.
I'm inspired by the level of risk that people take in the belief of something. They see it happening and then they go all in. And it sounds like you haven't looked back.
Not that it has been easy. Definitely not. And, there's certainly a lot of risk involved. But we do see that there's a sun on the horizon.
What are some of the things that surprise you about the evolution of Q&A and the rise of automation? I mean, you had mentioned that there's sometimes a resistance to it, but it really is something that can help accelerate productivity and efficiency.
Probably the resistance. If I could sit down with teams and talk about what their goals are and where they see themselves in 5 years, and I don't know that a lot of teams do that themselves, that it might be more clear to them that this is something that it's not just helpful for their immediate project or development cycle, or the very sort of myopic view of where they are today, but something that can help them long term. And I say that as a person who, I didn't finish school, and so getting into technology because I loved it allowed me the possibility of getting into a job like QA and becoming a test automation engineer myself, and seeing the benefits that gave, where we went from having 100 plus people in an office doing testing over the weekend to almost overnight having a small team that was responsible for test automation achieve the same and more. And that became a career path that really gave me all of the opportunities in my life. And so I'm really grateful for that. And what I want to do here is sort of pay it forward and help people realize that if you get into game testing because you love playing video games, for example, the two choices you have today are do that until you burn out or learn how to develop. And there is a third option that is not just beneficial for the individuals, but for the companies they work for and for the industry as a whole. I know it's a pretty lofty goal, but the more I talk to people, the more they realize that, yes, this is needed, and not just to improve the quality of their games, but to improve the quality of their industry and of their lives. That's what drives me, really.
What more should beginner XR developers and producers know about automating QA? And what are some of the early assumptions or misperceptions that you see in the field? We did talk about them, but if there's anything more you wanted to elaborate on.
It's never too early to start, meaning you don't have to wait until the product is near completion in order to automate things. That's one of the consistent sort of lines of feedback that we've gotten from our customers and from others in the industry using other potential solutions, just to say that you don't have to wait until it's nearly finished in order to do that automation. It should start right at the beginning, is number one. Number two, your game or application is not too complicated. That you're using programs to develop that behavior. You can use programs to automate that behavior as well. I know it seems complicated, but it's really not. And it doesn't require development or years of development experience to get it to that point.
That's a relief.
Yeah, that's, I think, one thing that people don't realize. And if they look at, for example, what we're doing, there is code involved, but it's not application development. The lines of code are just like, step one, do this. Step one, do that. It's very simple and doesn't require a development background.
Cool. Did you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share about the future of GameDriver and quality assurance testing?
I see that things are going in the right direction. As I said a few years ago, having this conversation or going to events was usually a much more difficult discussion because people just didn't understand the concept and the benefits. And I think those things are changing. And as an industry, it's not because of us, by the way, it's because as an industry, they're looking towards, a better solution. And so the industry is becoming more open to the idea that a better way exists. And that's sort of the natural kind of evolution, that something needed to change because so many failed games, so many failed projects, closed studios have just forced that to happen. And so from our perspective, what's next is, as the industry sort of comes to terms with that and starts to put it into practice and it becomes a reality and not an uphill battle, if you will, then we're ready for what's next, because we know that once that becomes a foregone conclusion, that the next set of questions needs to be answered. And I can't get into too much detail here as to what those solutions are, but we know that beyond the initial question of how do we do testing, there's another set of questions that needs to be answered.
Thank you, Shane, for joining us today on Zero to Start and sharing all of this really insightful information on how quality assurance and automation and game testing can really help improve not just overall efficiency and productivity, but the well-being of people working and making games.
Oh, my pleasure. And again, games and XR experiences for us, it's two sides of the same coin, but certainly we see that there's a ton of benefits beyond just saving time and money.
I hope this episode inspires you to embrace innovation and efficiency on your immersive journey. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support Zero to Start, leave us a rating on your favorite podcast platform. Be sure to subscribe and connect with us on our LinkedIn page. Until next time, happy installing.